I'll have to pay more attention to my spiders. No, spiders don't bother me. Except for when they're like really big and they're like spinning a ginormous web like in a pepper plant. And I'm like, I'm just gonna work around you.
This is Serious Grower Podcast. I'm Anna. I'm an entomologist, a scientist, and I am using this podcast to talk to all kinds of growers and eaters who are serious about their farms, their gardens, their local food system, and I am asking, how can science help? Today's co-host is Susan. She's a professor of agriculture at the University of New Hampshire. She also runs a community garden and works with students and community members across a wide range of age groups. You'll hear plenty from her as she has a ton of experience as both a commercial and non-commercial farm. We started off talking a little bit about how differently Susan approaches her planting schedule to meet the needs of teaching a college course during the academic year and growing for the very unique clientele of the UNH dining hall system. But because she's growing off season, she's doing most of her growing in high tunnels. If you're not familiar with a high tunnel, they might look a lot like a greenhouse to you, and I guarantee that you'll start seeing them everywhere now that you've heard me talking about them. They share a lot in common with greenhouses, a lot of similar gear. The principle is very similar, but a greenhouse technically is a permanent structure. Typically, they have a floor and it's almost always heated. While a high tunnel is technically a temporary structure built over existing agricultural land, and you grow right in the ground versus growing in pots. Some folks do add heating systems to high tunnels, but typically they are not heated. An unheated high tunnel can produce some very delicious greens through the winter by trapping solar radiation inside a simple tunnel on a sunny day in the dead of New Hampshire winter. It's pretty cool. Then they roll up the sides during the summer and grow summer crops like tomatoes. High tunnel tomatoes tend to be much higher quality than open culture tomatoes because they're protected from rain, which prevents fungal diseases without pesticides. It's a really unique system, and we see lots of farms adopting this approach. So it's a really nice tool to teach students how to grow things year round. Can you remind me again? I know that you have a community garden and you also have like a little CSA.
We're not doing the CSA anymore. That was through marriage and family therapy, which that program has been cut. So we did 1 year of it. It went really well. I got the word that they were being phased out, that major, which is such a loss. CSA is a great teaching tool, and it's a great way to have students plan and actually execute something on a timely manner versus like what we do for dining, which can be kind of like when they get it, they get it. And
yeah, and you can kind of say like, hey, chef, we have a bunch of extra blue bitty blop. Like,
yeah,
do you want it or not?
Right. And they're always like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing because the way that you've approached the learning opportunities, the teaching gardens, like you really do kind of have all the different local models. I was going to say, like, how does that impact your choices as far as like what you plant or how you go about your planting strategies?
We mostly focus on planting stuff so that we're harvesting the bulk of it, hopefully in the fall or like late summer. I worked in for-profit growing for so long, it's been really hard for me to switch that because you like see all the farms in June and they're just like cranking out stuff and you're like, I'm just starting to plant my tomatoes. Normally I would have had them in the ground like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, I like the rush to be like the first one to plant it was really like the name of the game.
Yeah, I worked on farms like planting tomatoes in the snow, like in tunnels, and over here like I have some peas and some greens and I'll think about summer in June. So this past year I feel like was the first year where I felt like I was actually having students harvest a ton during the semester and like bring it to dining and them see that whole process instead of it just being me and like maybe one other student in July and August, like just harvesting a ton and bringing it to them. They also don't have the manpower in dining anymore in the summer to deal with like bulk quantity stuff. So trying to be more strategic so that it's easier for them and for me, honestly, to process everything.
Yeah. I do remember them being very picky about the kinds of squash they wanted because they weren't able to process certain squashes that needed to be like peeled.
They want acorn squash and delicata and for winter squash.
Yeah. Do they still like having like the UNH bred acorn squashes? Like to say like, oh, like Honey Bear, like this was bred here. Is that something that's still important to them?
Yeah. I feel like from a marketing standpoint, luckily, even with all the changes that have been happening, actually kind of worked to our benefit as far as the dining hall goes, because now we have 2 head chefs who are like will take anything from me and they want stuff from me and it's like welcomed instead of it being like, ugh, we have to process all this squash and we don't want to. It's like, no, it's like, we'll take it and we'll figure it out as thank you. Come again.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. No, I feel you because like one of the first things that I was called into when I started an extension, you remember they used to produce aquaponic lettuce at Kingman Farm?
Yes.
And it was an engineering project, which was very funny because the guy who was in charge of that had a very engineering mindset. He was like, we do the same thing every week, no matter what, right? So they had this biocontrol program where they released a ton of stuff. They like lady beetles, everything. I remember walking in there in like January or February and like lady beetles. And I was like, why? And they're like, well, for the pests, like in case pests come in. I was like, it's January. Like if they weren't here before, they're not going to. You're like, we do the same thing every week. Oh my gosh, it was so funny. That would be the time of year that people get aphids, but you would have known if you had aphids by February.
Yeah.
They're not going to come in. But they had a really unique problem to that system. They had this aquatic midge. I still don't know what it was. It was not like your usual suspects as far as greenhouses because it was eating the algae in the aquaponic system. And it was not eating the lettuce, but the populations were so dense that they couldn't wash it off really easily. The dining hall people were washing it and they just they had to empty out the wash water so much there were still midges in their lettuce. They said, no, we can't take this anymore. So the researchers were like, well, we're not going to process the lettuce for you. They're like, we're not going to do that. So you just stopped selling it to the dining hall. I suggested a few different things. I was like, you could do this, you could do that. Like one thing that greenhouse growers do is they'll put up yellow sticky tape. Have you ever seen the big strands of yellow sticky tape that have the European systems? But it would have caught all of their bios they were releasing too. So they're like, oh, we can't do that because we had to release our bios.
They didn't want to reduce the population of anything, basically.
Yeah. And it is cumbersome to have yellow sticky tape everywhere. That's not great. And I was like, well, they do make a BT specifically for flies. It's BT israeliensis. These are the things that you might hear of mosquito dunks. You'll put them in ponds and they'll reduce mosquito larvae because mosquitoes are flies. But the thing about it was because it was closed system where they were growing lettuce and fish together, there was products that were registered for use in lettuce. And there was products that were registered for use in fish, but not both. So even though the two products were exactly the same, the formulations were probably the same, we couldn't use them because we would have been exposing the fish. Which one would you pick?
Right.
Right? There was a labeling issue. I mean, we probably should have just gone ahead and done that. Write a letter to the state saying the entomologist says it's cool.
Were they certified organic? Certified?
No, but whenever it comes to doing things by the letter of the law,
right?
They were just we're not going to break rules. If you apply something that's not registered for use on that crop, you're breaking federal law.
Right. And food safety.
I'm going to jump in here for a quick word about this biopesticide we're talking about, as well as pesticide labeling. So for those of you who have a lot of mosquito habitat in your neighborhood, maybe you have a little pond out back, mosquito dunks, mosquito bits, chunks are primarily for outdoor use. They contain a strain of the bacteria Bacillus thuringiensis that is a gut poison for fly larvae. If you're a gardener, you might be familiar with a different BT product that is used to control caterpillars, so the babies, the larvae of butterflies and moths. These biopesticides are very selective and are really only a risk to immature insects that are consuming treated material because it is a gut poison. So for those of you who have houseplants with a fungus gnat problem, a gnat is a kind of fly and its babies eat the fungus that is bound to grow in the soil media of your potted plant. So fungal hyphae that really thrive on those moist conditions. Good IPM practice is first to reduce your waterings. Most houseplants can handle a serious period of drought that will reduce the fungus and slow the development of those gnats. But there's also a ton of products out there containing this microbial biopesticide, this BTI, Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, death drops, knockout gnats, natron. All these products are registered for use on ornamental crops, so registered for use on plants that you do not eat. A thing or two about pesticide registration. Pesticides are regulated under a law called the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, as well as the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which ensure that these products do not pose unreasonable risks to human health or the environment. The registration process is rather complicated, but in a nutshell, it is the responsibility of both the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and each state government to ensure that pesticide products meet the requirements of this law, this FIFRA law. The pesticide maker, or what we call the registrant, in each case supplies all the supporting evidence to these government agencies, who then issue a label, which is a legal document that spells out how these products can and cannot be used. The EPA is staffed with experts who can make assessments regarding the safety of these products. So if the active ingredient of that pesticide is a neurotoxin, it is reviewed by a team with expertise in those chemistries, as well as ecotoxicology. If the active ingredient is a biological agent, which is the case in BTI, that product is reviewed by the Biopesticide and Pollution Prevention Division of the EPA. This team also has experts in ecotoxicology, but they also have expertise in microbial food safety and things that are associated with regulation of living organisms. Back to my conversation with Susan. There is some precedence for that. If like the pest that you're going after is not on the label, somebody like me can be like, oh, as long as it's registered for use on that crop, go ahead. It's the residue analysis that matters. In that situation, like I don't have enough leeway to say, oh, that product that's registered for use on fish, like, yeah, go ahead and apply it to lettuce. There's no problem.
Right.
It's one of these things where like the rules about pesticides were written by lawyers. They weren't written by biologists.
Right.
So it's a matter of liability. It's a matter of intent.
I feel like there's a lot of that in farming. Like we ran into like similar but not the same issue with building high tunnels at one of the farms because it started falling under fire code. The fire marshal's coming out to inspect, but like it's a plastic tunnel. So what are we inspecting? Kind of went out of control, and UNH ended up going to like legislation and being like, you need to change this law.
Susan and I knew each other well because when I was a researcher at UNH, her teaching tunnels were a very important research site for a big research project that I was involved with. I was part of a team of researchers in New Hampshire, Indiana, and Illinois who wanted to understand pest and biological control in high tunnel systems across various continuums. We were scouting high tunnel vegetable crops across a rural to urban continuum to see how those landscape effects might influence the insects in those systems. We were also interested in a temporal continuum to see how four-season growing impacts pests and their biological control agents. We sometimes refer to this as a green bridge. Are you providing a green bridge for pest populations that continue to thrive if you keep growing their host plant through the winter? We were visiting many, many tunnel growing sites over several years, and Susan's teaching tunnel was an ideal site because although she did keep a few summer crops like tomato going over the summer, most of her activities occurred during the fall, winter, and spring to match the college calendar. Key pests of winter growing, aphids. They do feed on plants, but they really cause too much damage. I mean, sometimes they can cause distorted growth on plants or reduce the overall yield if populations are really high. But aphids are primarily a crop contaminant that needs to be washed off leafy greens like lettuce or spinach. During the summer, there's an army of natural enemies that come and eat aphids. We are talking about lady beetles, parasitoid wasps that lay their eggs inside these aphids. There's a bajillion species of wasps that will lay their eggs inside aphids and leave behind this funny husk, We call them aphid mummies. I'll put a photo on our Instagram of what that looks like. I mentioned predatory fly larvae. You might be familiar with hoverflies. If you're not, you should. They're really charming little flies that look like tiny bees kind of hanging in midair. They're not bees, but they are pollinators just like bees. They eat pollen and nectar and things like that, the adults, but their babies are aphid predators. They'll lay their eggs near aphid colonies and the little maggots will come and eat the aphids. It's really remarkable. But those groups, they are hibernating during the winter, which allows aphids to run amok in the tunnels. They are incredibly cold hardy too. So freezing temperatures do not kill them. Often high tunnel growers will start a crop of spinach in the fall, grow it up a little bit, cover them up over the holidays, and then go out in January to shock horror aphid infestations. You know that project faced some challenges when it came to labor. We are just starting to see some manuscripts come together on that. Yeah, it's been slow. But if you remember, I was crawling on hands and knees, sucking spiders into a tube all winter, and I didn't really know why, and I was so mad. But in hindsight, I did learn a lot. What I haven't learned yet is, if you remember, the point of it is that they were going to do gut content analysis. They were going to report on if you collected this group or that group, they were responsible for whatever proportion of aphids, or they do some math.
Yeah.
And it was never really explained to me fully enough to understand why I was crawling around on hands and knees, sucking spiders into tubes.
I feel like the spiders were definitely not keeping my aphid population in check.
No. Well, come to find out, the actual project was to look at little tiny spiders that are on tomato. And so I just heard collect 10 predators as many times as you can year round. So that's why I was in the corners, looking for these spiders that are definitely not on crops. They just are living in your tunnels.
Yeah.
I have no idea. But I guess we'll find out what they were doing.
I feel like, most of my spiders are in the soil, or they're hiding under plastic or underneath something. They're not really on plants.
Now that I've mentioned it, I guarantee you this summer when you're growing tomatoes, you'll start noticing these guys.
I'm going to see them everywhere.
And because they're really little and you're not really looking for them. But when the student so she started sharing information with us, and she's showing us pictures of the spiders she's collecting from tomato. And I'm like, oh no. I was like, that's what we're looking for.
You're not those big brown jumpy ones?
I was like, oh my God, I had no idea. I would have been doing things completely differently. But they're tiny, tiny little spiders. So they're actually kind of cute. And then there's those crab spiders. They're kind of yellow, almost translucent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think those were the groups that we were supposed to be looking for on tomato. Well, live and learn. Well, I hope we learned something. I'm looking forward to that gut content analysis. We typically don't talk about spiders when we're talking about biocontrol of key insect pests in commercial settings. This is because spiders are generalist predators. They don't have really strong relationships between their feeding and the pests of economic concern. Nonetheless, they are providing some balance in your garden and in those commercial vegetable systems. Meta-analyses found spiders suppressing agricultural pests in 79% of the studies they included. That was a very interesting finding for me. They maybe don't solve the problem, but they certainly contribute. Spiders often forage for pests like aphids, which have been recorded in the diet up to 63% of spiders under field conditions. I found this to be true in a couple of the papers I looked at. How do we know what spiders are eating? Well, we kind of ask them. We do something called gut content analysis. What does that mean? We collect the whole animal. We surface sterilize that animal with something like ethanol. What this means in reality is drowning that animal in ethanol. And it surface sterilizes them to remove anything that's on the outside of them. And then we process the whole animal and look for genetic sequences in that whole sample. The thinking is that if we find aphid DNA in that sample, that aphid DNA was in that spider's tummy. It's a pretty good assumption, and there is a tested track record of this approach. Our collaborators on the project in Illinois, They had markers for a handful of pests that they were looking for in these spider samples. And they can do a little bit of math based on published data to estimate how much spiders contribute to control of aphids in these tunnels. Stay tuned for results on that. As Susan and I discussed, spider species vary widely in their niche partitioning, where they live, what they eat, the times of year they are active. So me crawling around on hands and knees, sucking up spiders from underneath her row covers in the dead of winter does nothing to explain how much tomato pest biocontrol can be attributed to spiders living way up above the ground in the tomato plant canopy. I think that was one of the main interests of my collaborators over time. How do you feel about looking at pictures of spiders?
Let's do it.
Do you have it in you today?
Yeah.
I don't want to get too dramatic about this, but I want to explain how embarrassing it is for me professionally that I get skeeved out by spiders. Because I'm an entomologist, and granted, entomology, depending on who you talk to, is the study of insects. Spiders are not insects. They are arachnids, but they're all arthropods, right? So a lot of the times we'll talk about arthropods as a bigger group, and we're bringing all these different groups. I think part of the reason spiders skeeve me out so badly is that they move really differently. So insects, they have articulated joints that have muscles, and the muscles, like, granted, their skeleton is on the outside of their body instead of the inside of their body, but they move in really predictable ways. Spiders use hydraulic pressure. When they put their little leg forward, it's because that limb is filling with blood, and then muscles bring it back, filling with blood. So it's like erection, erection, erection. And they're just like, ugh. And that is why when you find a dead spider, they're like curled up in a ball because they've lost that hydrostatic pressure.
I'm going to have to explain that to my husband, because he's also very scared of spiders, and like maybe that'll give him some perspective, because he's not afraid of like other insects. It's just spiders.
I think it's like the way that they move. I don't like it. I don't trust them.
I'll share what skeeves me out in farming, if that helps you feel better. I hate compost. Rotting vegetables, no. It's so gross. The smell, I hate it. Terrible. Awful.
Do you like it once it has been composted, or is that a pleasant?
Yeah, like when it looks like soil. Yeah. But like the process and mostly just rotting vegetables is like really gross to me, especially when you like kept it in a 5-gallon bucket with a lid on for a couple weeks.
Well, now that we've gotten our icks out of the way, let's get into my main ick, which is looking at pictures of spiders. So if you remember, we were talking about wolf spiders being really generalists. This guy right here, I see a lot of this group in your tunnel. So you recognize that guy?
Yeah.
They don't spin webs, the wolf spiders. They're more likely to find like a safe place to hide.
Gotcha.
Like I was finding them under the row covers in the corner of the tunnels. But I was finding them active in the wintertime. They're very generalist. So they do contribute some biocontrol, but they also eat other spiders. And I think that's part of the reason that most of us generalist entomologists are like, spiders aren't that important to biocontrol. It's a sign, it's an indicator that you have a really healthy population of animals if you have lots of spiders. Like they're doing something.
Right.
But the more I was reading what the groups that they were telling us about, I mentioned a couple different groups that they were interested in. One is these crab spiders. So this is the group that have like the legs that kind of go out like this.
Yeah.
I think this group is more likely to be up in the canopy of your crop.
Yeah, like that yellowy one. Like I feel like I've seen.
Yeah, I've seen that before. And then the group that is the most famous for providing real biocontrol is this little tiny one. I really tried to find pictures where you could see the scale of it, which was quite difficult. This little guy, the black-tailed red sheet weaver, you can see the kind of webs they're making. There weren't good. Oh, they're so tiny. And I kind of guarantee, like this right here, I think is a good indication of what I was like, oh, I've seen those before.
Yeah. They kind of have like those slinky legs.
I found a picture of one eating like a potato leafhopper nymph, and they were about the same size.
Okay, so yeah, pretty small.
Yeah, it's an aphid. You can see this spider eating an aphid.
Nice. I'll have to pay more attention to my spiders.
Right?
No, spiders don't bother me. Except for when they're like really big and they're like spinning a ginormous web like in a pepper plant. And I'm like, I'm just gonna work around you.
Now, these kinds of miscommunications can happen amongst collaborators on big projects like this high tunnel biocontrol project. More often than us scientists might like to admit, multiple labs will take leadership on one or more aspects of the project and then also contribute to the other labs' projects by collecting samples like this kind of on the side. My team at UNH was really focused on winter-grown spinach, so in hindsight, I may have been too focused on what I thought was the most interesting part of the story, and that is off-season growing, that four-season growing, and the trouble that high tunnel growers can potentially find themselves in after years and years of continuous production. But I certainly learned my lesson. I think anybody would ask a few more questions next time around if they knew it would result in spending your whole winter crawling around sucking spiders into tubes. But it was a very valuable project in that we were visiting commercial tunnel growers once a month, every month, year round. I learned a ton about how commercial growers are actually doing this and how different folks are using these season extension tools in really amazing ways. I also see now that my prejudice against spiders may have been clouding my judgment. So I cannot wait to find out what my collaborators learn about how these unique spider groups were contributing to tomato pest biocontrol. Stay tuned for that and find photos of these spiders, especially the tiny little sheet weaver spiders, on our Instagram at Serious Grower. Go and check it out. Serious Grower Podcast is a production of New Hampshire Community Supported Research. If you are interested in becoming a co-host or would like to learn more about our mission to democratize agricultural research, visit our website at nhcsr.org or come over to our YouTube channel at nhcsr, where we're sharing insights from the agricultural research community, and we will be vlogging our research efforts on the farm. You can support this work by liking and subscribing, or even better, consider joining our Patreon community.